Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 102. Hey everyone, just a quick episode. I'm banging everything. Hey everyone, just a quick episode. I am going to talk a little bit about the webinar I just hosted. And I hosted one on burnout, of course, pivots. I am hitting everything today. I'm just smacking everything on my computer because I think what I've heard a lot from therapists is they have this question of, should I stay in my role longer or should I go? Many therapists tell me they can't do this anymore. It is unsustainable. I can't stay in my role as a therapist. And so I want to just talk about what came up for me on the webinar, give you a brief synopsis of it. And yeah, so we're just going to do that. So when I started the webinar, see, if I'm in my office, like I'm just talking to myself. So, I was shaky, I was jittery. And of course, I watched my replay and it was fine. Like I was fine. There wasn't a problem. I put the wrong link in there. There's going to be one tech issue if you do something like this, right? It's just bound to happen. Yeah. So that's fine. And then, like once it got going, I feel like questions started coming in and these questions weren't casual. It wasn't like, tell me a little bit about burnout. It was vulnerable stuff. And I won't put like all the details of that on a public podcast, but just some themes that I wanted to share with you guys. So I just felt like people were just so vulnerable and honest. And I think there's just no accident that the people that showed up to that call, right? Many of them were either closing their practice or in the process of closing their practice or very close to like leaving a job or something like that. And I just found that really illuminating because I've been talking about this on the podcast. I'm working on a course regarding that. And this group isn't specifically for people that are closing their practices, but it seems like that's who I attract to my calls and to my stuff. And so I think the common through line is it's unsustainable. I can't do this work anymore. And what do I do next? And so some of that might just be I'm closing my practice and I need like the next step on how to say goodbye to clients and how to wrap this up in a really ethical way, in a way that holds me too, which I think clinicians don't think about, that you need to be held as well. And I can't tell you how much, like I haven't had a group of therapists like this. I've been podcasting and I've been doing one-to-one consulting, but I really haven't had a group together. And just even on that webinar, gave me so much life just to hold the space and to see other therapists bringing up similar themes and know that they're not alone. I think that was the biggest takeaway, that they're not alone and there's other people that are considering leaving, that are closing their practices, and that was the common thread for me. So I want to talk about some takeaways, but before I do that, I do want to give a shout out to my program. So it's called Leaving the Chair and it's a 12-week group experience for therapists. It's for $950. It's a screaming deal, y'all. Okay, 12 group sessions, and 4 of those are 40-minute workshops that I've developed for you and developing. So it's going to be a process where you're going to tell me, what do you want to talk about? And it's the 90 minutes really is not about like giving you guys content because burned out people don't need a lot of content. They need space. So they need, okay, I need room to make these decisions. I need feedback. I need support. And so any like tips and content that I give you guys, talks are going to be very bite size, and then there's going to be application discussion. So that's what we'll do pretty much in those 90-minute sessions. It's just going to give us more time to kind of have breakout groups, get to know people and things like that, really get support. And then the rest of them will be more supportive. So really holding space for each other, talking through decisions that are coming, those types of things. That's what those containers will look like. So if you want to join me for that experience, Leaving the Chair registration closes. I'm extending it one day because I feel like how are we at Wednesday? I don't know. I'm extending it one day. So if you want to register for Leaving the Chair, sign up. The link will be in the show notes. And that is at the time of this recording, Saturday, January 1st at midnight. So I will see you in there. And I can't wait to do this work with you. And I know it's heavy and I'll be there for you. I will meet you there. And this lovely group of therapists that is forming will also meet you there. So that's what I want to say. Okay. Takeaway number 1. Burnout makes decision making feel impossible. We can't make really sound decisions when we are fried to a crispy crisp. That's just our brains, they do not make great decisions. You're not going to feel super grounded. Everything will feel shaky because you're depleted. And I first saw this in my work with brain injury survivors. Decision making was so hard because their nervous system was constantly in threat. And so calming the nervous system was always my first goal with them. And there was decisions that we made during those times. Yeah, they needed to make decisions. I get that. But it makes you second guess yourself. It makes you feel like everything is like you're in danger, everything is risky, you can't trust yourself. That's one of the things I told myself over and over again. And I think just to remember that if you're struggling to make a decision, you're overloaded, and sometimes getting some space can help you find the room to start making the decisions you need to make. I've been a little under the weather, and so thus I'm extending it a day, but I probably need to extend it a week. But here we are. People aren't let's see, takeaway number 2. People don't ask this enough, but people will ask me, like, what job should I do? And that's just an interesting question because I have no idea what job you should do. And I shouldn't, because I'm not you. I am not in your body. I have not lived your life. Maybe you've worked in real estate before. Maybe you did bartending before. Maybe you worked at the library before and that sounds great to you and works with your personality. Maybe you are a super extrovert and you did sales before and that's what you want to do now. There's literally infinite options. And so I can't tell you what job you could do. Many jobs. Like for me, I talked about, like, in many of my roles, I've been an instructor. And so I have been a professor. I was a foster parent trainer. I've taught CPR. I teach fitness classes. I teach a lot. I like to teach. And so I could see that being part of my role if I don't do direct clinical work. So, but that's me. That's not you. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. I think one of the things that came up on the call too was that and I've seen this before, multiple people have said this in forums and people I talk to, like they need to take a job. Let's say it's like, at a local coffee house or bartending or retail or something like that. And it feels like a step back and there's a huge amount of shame and just feeling like I'm taking this step back. And how do you manage those feelings that come up when you need to make this choice? You know, you need to make this choice, but you don't want to. And how do you struggle with feeling like you failed or you couldn't hack it or you couldn't do it? And that, I would say, is the burnout talking. I think anyone who has to make these decisions that need to leave this work, I have so much compassion for. And if you need to borrow some of my compassion for you, borrow it. It's hard to have that for ourselves to see, wow, it's no wonder you need a break. And you're doing the very best you can and you're making the very best choices you can. So I think wherever you can find that compassion for yourself, even if it's borrowed, to try to do it. Number 3, your pivot doesn't have to be dramatic. I talked about this a lot on the webinar, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this group too. So yes, we want to make decisions. We want to move, but they have to be tethered to a nervous system that can hold that. So if you have to, like, the house is burning and you got to jump out the window, you jump out the window, right? Your body is giving up on you. You can't do it. You're having panic attacks. Yeah, you need to go. You need to go. I get that. So sometimes burnout forces us into a dramatic exit and we don't have a choice anymore, but some of you still might have a choice and can think about doing this in a way that's a little slower. And there's nothing wrong if you have to do that, by the way. So I talked about my career traffic circle because we might need to go in and out of the traffic circle if we need to. And I'm just going to give you broad strokes. I went into this in more depth on the webinar, but we forget that we can stop, we can pause, we can take a sabbatical, we can take a medical leave, we can take a real break if we need it. And number 2 would be slowing down. So maybe you're still working, but you're reducing clients. Maybe you take on a contract role. Start to shore up some finances. That's what I did. When I kind of wound down my practice, I was taking on a contract work with doing evaluations. And someone else on the call was talking about doing evaluations as well. My voice is getting raspier as we go. Number 3 is the bridge. So I see that as a bridge job, either the off ramp or the on ramp. So off ramp could be really any job you can do, any job that makes you money immediately. So thinking about if it's bartending, if it's working in a restaurant, if it's gig work, maybe you've done something in the past where it makes sense for you to take on a job that can just make some money. The on ramp would be something that you maybe are working towards. So some people have done consulting, coaching, some people do like CEUs. Those are more like building on ramps. And I think other on ramps could be like retraining. And some of those can be fast and slow, right? I've heard of people that have gone to do like the air traffic controller. That is a shorter on ramp. Like the training isn't as long. I've known other people to do like delivery jobs. That's not much of an on ramp. You can just get it. That's more of a bridge job actually. So the on ramp would require some training to do. That might be for a psychologist, and also I see master's level clinician doing assessment too. I think there's some caveat with that. You need to have some training. So I've seen them doing like evaluation, like biopsychosocial evaluations or other types of evaluations. I might have a whole like talk on that because I think that would be helpful for probably master's levels folks. I think for psychologists, we're trained in assessment, so it makes sense that could be other work we could do. Okay. The full pivot, the bigger career shift is usually later. And I think about my big career shift when I worked in child welfare, when I worked as a caseworker, and then I became a licensed clinical psychologist. That was like 10-year span for me to make that full shift to do that. I don't recommend the full pivot. Think about one of these other things because you don't know if you're going to like it. So you might go, okay, I'll be an air traffic controller, or I'll do like get my real estate license, for example, and maybe you won't like that. So I recommend dabbling first. Okay. Takeaway number 4 was that identity grief was something that came up huge on the call. That identity of being a therapist, and if you leave the field not being a therapist. And I know many people will offer you the platitude. Other therapists will say, oh, you're always a therapist, but like you're not a therapist anymore. Like I wasn't a therapist for a year and a half. I do see one client now. And I don't identify with the role of being a therapist as much anymore. I'll just say I have a therapy client. I do some therapy on the side. That's more of what I do. But I think if you have ever stepped away from this work, then having that identity untethered to yourself is grieving. And so I talked about grief on the call. And I think that's a huge part of this work. If you're thinking about leaving or you are in the process of leaving, then that's what happens. That's what shows up. That's what comes to the table. A lot of people talked about the termination and closure in the context of closing their practice or leaving the work. And that always comes up. And like the reactions that clients will have always comes to the table. So I think I'm just thinking of more resources for you folks, maybe doing a training on termination. I've had it in the back of my mind to do, but it might be a project that I'd like to do maybe in the later part of the year or even the early part of next year to give more resources on that specific topic. Okay, I have another one. 6. The biggest problem, this is the biggest problem, is that many of us are doing this alone. I did this alone. And that can be the hardest part, honestly, is that you are holding all this and no one gets it. Even your therapist may not get it. I felt that as well. They try, people are well meaning, but they don't understand. It's not like, and again, when I worked in brain injury, I feel like, especially with concussion, right? Like they had a concussion. No one's bringing you lasagnas for that. They're like, oh, okay, well, they'll be back in a couple weeks. They're fine, right? They're fine. They weren't fine and they lost their job. Maybe they lost a relationship and they were not fine. And I saw, especially with brain injury, how alone that was and how layered with grief it was. And this is something that's really hard to do alone. And so not all people understand it. I get that. You have resources like this podcast. You have my pen pal list. If you're on my pen pal list, join it if you're not on it, where I send you tips and just support in this way. And this group, right? I hope this group can be support. I have 5 spots available and I'd love for someone to come in and get the support they need in these decisions. So if you would like to join us, We meet Fridays, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and start on February 6th. The group is again Screaming Deal, $9.50. You can get all those details to register. If you have a question, you can certainly reach out to me. I'm info@drjenblanchett.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Jen Blanchett. I'll send you a voice DM if you have a question about it. I'd love to talk with you more. And just one last reflection. So I really enjoyed doing that webinar. I don't know about the whole day of prep to do it. I don't have that in my schedule, but I know as I'm thinking about launching my practice closure course, I'm going to be hosting some more and just thinking about different topics for people that are thinking about leaving the field. I know termination might be one. So even if you aren't closing your practice, like maybe you're just wanting a training on termination, we can do that. That would be fun to do. I'm weird and I talk about existential things all the time and have existential angst. So I think about life and death anxiety. You probably had been thinking about my death from at like 5 years old. So if you are like me, you understand what I'm talking about. Okay. That is all for today. I will link everything in the show notes. I will have that guest that I talked about having this week. It's going to be next week because I got sick. And so everything got thrown off. And we almost had like 2 feet of snow here in the state of Maine. So I know many of you who are on the East Coast, there was a whole bunch of weather in the US. And so definitely was a lot to contend with. Okay. I will see you next time.